Hi, everyone. My name is Leah. I'm a PhD student at the University of Minnesota, and today I'll be presenting on our work, a systematic review of ethics disclosures in predictive mental health research. This work was done in collaboration with researchers at Georgetown University, CU Boulder, Marquette, and Georgia Tech. We're very grateful for everyone who made this work possible. A brief content warning. This paper does discuss mental illness, suicidality, and EDs. Feel free to leave the room or skip this talk altogether if it's no longer serving you, especially on a healing journey. Particularly in the United States, mental illness is at an all-time high. Yet treatment is inaccessible to the point where it can take a decade, even more, for people who are experiencing symptoms to receive the treatment that they need. The problem is even worse in teens, and in some cases is a matter of life or death. Therefore, it is crucial that we find non-invasive ways to promote support-seeking and treatment-seeking behaviors from those exhibiting mental illness symptoms. To that end, there's over a decade of research on predicting mental health states from social media. While these methods are non-invasive compared to traditional diagnostic options, this is ripe with ethical nuance. We are using data that, while public, is about sensitive topics, is from potentially vulnerable populations who may not even really be informed about how their data is going to be used upon the time of making those disclosures and those posts. To explore this tension, we ask, what is the landscape of ethics disclosures in predictive mental health research, particularly when using social media data? We chose to focus on disclosures in archived research papers because we're interested in closing the ought-is gap in predictive mental health research. This is the gap between what is ethically prescribed, so what should be happening, and what is happening currently, or what is feasible within the realm of our current status. Now, Sisk et al. Note there are a few ways to close the ought-is gap. One is transparency in ethical decision-making. 2 is standardization in ethics practices. And 3 is iterative norms with venues for deliberation that are explicit and transparent. So in order to explore all of this, we built on the Chancellor and Choudhury corpus, which is archived research papers that use machine learning methods to predict a mental health state using social media data. This involves searching 41 interdisciplinary venues for 16 keyword pairs with keywords about mental illness and keywords about social media. We then filtered these using the PRISMA guidelines and snowball sampled from the citations of those original papers. This led us to 129 papers, which we'll call our data set. These papers span from 2013 to 2022. We built our rubric inductively. So what that means is we started with these rough concepts of ethics disclosures. We then started coding papers with what disclosures we saw and iteratively updated those concepts as we coded more and more papers. We formalized the rubric once we felt we reached saturation. We then applied this rubric to all 129 papers. This involved using 3 coding authors who cross-coded 10 papers. To code for a disclosure, there was an indicator coding that was typically along the lines of yes or no. You can see more nuance in this figure. And then we also had a memo for each disclosure for qualitative analysis. We then consulted with our non-coding expert authors to ensure that we're not missing any sort of disclosures that are unspoken or rarely disclosed. So at a high level, our results indicate a severe lack of standardization. For example, subject inclusion and exclusion criteria is disclosed in about 96% of our papers. Meanwhile, informing subjects or moderators is only disclosed in about 7.75%. Moreover, we find that this disparity falls along methodological lines. So even in human-centered concerns, disclosing your data source is necessary for replicability, which is why it's happening so often. Intuitively, this makes a lot of sense given that papers often have page limits and therefore authors need to be extremely strategic about what they are disclosing. Furthermore, we found some disclosure practices are sticky insofar as they either, one, have an increasing trajectory to high adoption, or two, are highly disclosed and that high percentage remains stable over time. Now, these practices being sticky evidences that they are implicit norms, so unwritten but widely accepted rules amongst researchers in this domain. Moreover, we can see that these sticky disclosures, once again, often serve methodological purposes, such as inclusion criteria, data source, or data sharing. We also found qualitative evidence of these implicit norms. So we found an increase in the use of secondary data sets over time. However, the disclosures that were happening there oftentimes just referred back to the original data set creation work rather than discussing ethics in the context of that paper. So how is that data set being used in that specific paper? Moreover, we found arguments that asking social media users to participate in their research, so asking for consent, could be coercive. This argument first appeared in 2015, but then we found it used in multiple papers after that spanned all the way to 2022. It's important to note that this argument runs counter to widely accepted evidence that consent is an anti-coercive measure, which means that this implicit norm is going against what is explicitly considered to be the truth or explicitly considered to be a practice. This means that it warrants nuanced discussion rather than being unwrittenly adopted more and more. Moreover, we look at what if things stay the same. So we took the year-over-year rate of change and extrapolated that out to the point where, on average, 75% of our rubric items are being disclosed. Now, promisingly, we can see that the disclosure landscape will get better. We are trending upwards over time. However, it will take 8 years for us to reach this 75% coverage. That means we won't hit it until 2031. To put that into perspective, 8 years ago was still 3 years before the first Fat Star conference. So this is a long amount of time, especially when we consider the impact, the life or death situation that some mental illness truly is. Now, before I get into implications, I want to close this presentation out with a poetic definition of ethics. Decisions fall into the realm of ethics when they pertain to things within our control that can show respect to human being. It's important to note that mental health is the human condition. It is inherent to being a human being. Moreover, how we handle data, how we disclose those decisions, and how we choose to move forward are all things that are within our control as researchers, which is why it is so important for us to have this work that explores ethics in that regard. Our work evidences that we cannot afford the status quo. We cannot afford to wait 8 years for trends to slowly pick up. We suggest that we create venues to make implicit norms explicit, specifically by, one, creating work that determines what are the implicit norms currently going on in the field, and then two, having discussions on whether those should be explicit and how to make those explicit. Finally, we suggest creating catalysts for current trends. We are on an upward trend, and we should leverage that and run with it. In our paper, we suggest things such as context exercises or increased documentation. However, I encourage you to leave this room thinking about how you engage with ethics in your own research. What are ways in which you can capture that and disseminate it to your colleagues in order to create a larger discussion about what we're doing in predictive mental health research. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation, and I would love to open the floor up for questions now.